Good morning everyone. This is the continuation on post-colonial criticism. How to start from post-colonial reading. The next session actually the next title, post-colonial reading. Let us see what it is. Reading literature with the perspective of Orientalism in mind would make us, for instance, critically aware of how Yeats in his two Byzantium poems. See, we are going to take some of the literary works to see how post-colonial criticism works. When you are applying this theory, this particular theory, or its tenets in certain works of literature or works of art in general, how you can locate the elements of colonialism or the racial prejudices. That itself is one of the major functions, major methods of post-colonial criticism. So that here in Peterbury text, for this time being, we are taking two of the poems by W.B. Yeats, one of the major modern writers of the 20th century. You are going to take two of his poems to analyze it in post-colonial terms, or how now you know how Orientalism works. It's the way West looks at East. If you want to put it very simply, it's the way West looks at East, and you know for sure that's not a desirable way of looking on the part of one on another. Means they look at us with a kind of prejudice. They say that you are good for nothing, you are not cultured, you are barbarous. This is the way they try to label us. They try to impose certain characteristics on us. So here, post-colonial reading, wherever you are trying for a attempting for a post-colonial reading, you try to find out such elements, sometimes hidden, sometimes very visibly available in literary works or works of art in general. Here we are going to take, as part of this text, two of the poems. This is a title. Post-colonial reading is titled in Peterbury text, 3rd edition, page number 187. So, first main title is background, under which we discussed almost all the major texts in this area. Now we are discussing the second title, post-colonial reading, and the first and foremost part is about the poems, two poems by W.B. Yeats, who is you are not unfamiliar with this writer, but the poems under discussion may not be that familiar to you, but we will have a discussion on that. If not in a line by line manner, I will get you what the poems say about. So here, see these poems, two Byzantium poems, means one is sailing to Byzantium and the other is Byzantium itself. And what the poem, actually it provides an image of Istanbul, the eastern capital of the former Roman Empire, which is identified with the torpor, sensuality and exotic mysticism. You will have to know Byzantium as a concept. It's something very important to be noted down. You know, Constantinople, Byzantium. These are connected, these are two different names which refer to the same city, a city of learnedness, art, culture, literature, flourishing of everything during a time before the fall of Constantinople. Byzantium as such stands as the symbol of education, culture, art, everything that demands respect, covetousness. We feel that much for that city because of the characteristics that are attached to that. And here this poet talks about sailing to Byzantium. First time he talks about sailing to Byzantium. The first poem, he talks about sailing to Byzantium, and he gives a lot of reasons for that. Why he is not happy where he is and why he is trying to move to this particular city. And he gives a lot of description regarding the beauty of artistry, art, culture, sculptures, everything in that very poem itself. And next is about his experience of reaching and Byzantium itself. So here, but our matter of concern when you are dealing with such a poem under post-colonial studies is something entirely different. Actually, it provides an image of Istanbul, eastern capital of the former Roman Empire. Capital of the former Roman Empire, which is identified with torpor, sensuality and exotic mysticism. Something which is exotic. One of the ideas that we have already discussed in the last session. Because see, attributing something or telling that this is mystic, this is exotic, means you close down the possibility for going to know about it. You have a prejudice about something already and you say that, oh, that person is unapproachable. Sometimes you might have got this idea from somewhere or some other acquaintances of you. But you see, you don't spend or you don't take an effort or at least a willingness to see if the person is approachable or not, but you stick on to the prejudice and say that, oh, that person is very problematic or unapproachable, rude, so I won't go and make company. In the same way, exotic is in one sense it's something exquisite with a lot of qualities, mysterious qualities. But when a Westerner talks about, Westerner attributes this particular characteristic, or when looking at another space, another set of people, another culture, if they say that it is exotic land, they mean something entirely different. Either they mean that, oh, they are barbarous, they are cultureless, or they are not something, preferably mingling. We don't have anything left out to mingle with them, or we don't have something to appreciate them. Exotic, like something not available, unavailable in the sense we cannot deal with them in a true and comfortable way. Here, this poem actually, at a surface level reading, looks like giving the details of Byzantium, praising that particular city. That's a surface level reading that you get there. But in actual sense, we have to look at the background of this writer, W.B. Yeats, his belonging, his nationality, and the possible identity that he can take while composing such poems about a city which is alien to him, which he doesn't belong to Byzantium, he's a total stranger to that land. At such moments, he adopts an ethnocentric or Eurocentric perspective. Actually, you didn't see the land. You come to know about any land, whichever land it may be, which is not yours, from pictures, from writings or some others descriptions, so that your perspective is not actually a lively or true to heart, face to face, that doesn't come from any of your true experience of going there or being with the people there. In the same way, W.B. Yeats, his nationality or his attachment with English soil, his exposure to English land, English culture. And such a man, when such a man writes down such a poem about another land, which is completely a strange land for him, the people of which also are total strangers for him, he doesn't know anything or much about their ways, their life, their culture, anything. And when such a person writes down this poem or such poems about another land, another people, every chance is there that you become so ethnocentric or Eurocentric. Your perspective is blotted, it is colored with the Eurocentrism, means Europe as the center. Europe is something very really comprehensible, cultured, without having any problem regarding sensuality or unapproachability. These are the characteristics that these colonizers or the Eurocentric people or the first world citizen, they try to attribute on these people or the people of colonized lands, former colonies or third world nation. So even when these two poems at the surface level seem like portraying a very good picture of Byzantium, this prejudice of a foreign land or a totally estranged land to be exotic or mystic, something unwelcoming, that are likely to occur in somewhere in the poems and portrayals as well. So East is the exotic other. Definitely Roman Empire doesn't belong to European, English people, or they are not really attached with us. So actually Romans came as the invaders at a time period, at a point of time in European land. But later that Roman Empire collapsed. That's why we talk about in the middle English period or in the later part of that century, in the late 1453, so the fall of Constantinople, you can identify the century. And by that time that empire collapsed. Center of learning. Scholars began to run with their lives and study materials, scholarly materials throughout Europe. That's how Renaissance takes place. But this land, the city is known for its art and many other development by that time itself or during that time itself. It was an invincible culture, invincible city, but that fell on its own grounds actually because of the corruption. You may have idea about the kind of divisions in this Roman kingdoms, and later because of their own corruptions that began to fall down. All these ideas are there as part of history, but we have to know when here in this context, it's very simple to know W.B. Yeats, though Irish, he has much more exposure to the English culture, English land and all. Their culture, their ways, their living style, their language. So when he portrays yet another city like Byzantium or Roman culture, every chance is that his prejudice towards some other land may pop up, may come to the forefront. And here, seeing the East as an exotic other. Orientalism is ultimately about that, not just other, but an exotic other. And from that very term, they try to pick up the kind of attributes, and Euron, that's the colonizer or the Eurocentric man, the European subject, they themselves are not really confident about their identity, their ways, their lifestyle, but they try to attribute all these qualities, all these problems on others, so that their ego is satisfied, their ego is not hurt. And that's why I pointed out in the last session regarding ego defense mechanism. You are not ready to willing to admit your own loopholes, your own problems. You are not willing to go for an introspection. So what? So you try to attribute all these problematic characteristics on others so that you are timing, you are safe. You feel that, oh, they are worse than us. Their situation is very bad. They are cultureless. Their language is very bad. When they say this again and again, when they try to convince it for their own sake, they have a satisfaction of some kind. And that's why this exotic other is very important in Orientalist view of culture, Orientalist view in terms of post-colonialism or post-colonial subjectivity, which becomes the contrasting foil to his own pursuits and concerns. Actually, it's the contrasting foil to his own pursuits and concerns. Pursuits. They are pursuing something. They want to assert that is the colonial subject, colonial subjects. They want to assert their centrality, their importance, so that these concerns in one way or other take the shape of a criticism leveled against other sector like third world nations, colonized subjects, and many other domains. So here all of which the form presents as normative. Actually, when you look at the form, I told you, you feel this like an appreciation of Byzantium. If you are not thinking in terms of colonizing, colonizer or post-colonialism, you feel this to be very normative a poem. There is nothing wrong about it. It writes down this with all wholehearted appreciation of Byzantium. There is no chance of criticizing or finding out the elements of colonizing, colonizer mindset, nothing as such. But if you analyze it in terms of the possible psychological impact because of his own exposure to English land, English culture, we can identify certain elements. Actually, he is viewing that Byzantium as a land of exotic features. It's not a very naive or innocent appreciation of another land. Interestingly, Edward Said has written an essay on Yeats which reads him in the context of post-colonialism. Yes, that's where we try to trace back the background details of this writer and how that background might have influenced this person while writing a poem or while composing anything about another land, another culture, another set of people who are alien to his land or the European centrality. In Culture and Imperialism, it's another text by this person, Edward Said, where he tries to criticize or look at Yeats with an eye of critical way, that Yeats, which reads him in the context of post-colonialism. How Yeats' poems can be read in the context of post-colonialism. That's the only way in which you can find out these elements. Otherwise, yeah, I told you, sailing to Byzantium. The person is preferably sailing to that space. Standing at the yeah, being in the 20th century, a modern man is willingly and wishing to sail to that kind of a city of some 15th centuries back, because he is not happy about where he is. He is not actually happy about where he is or what his culture allots him. That's the way innocently it's portrayed, and you read it. You also, when you get these two poems by Yeats, you take it in a very naive sense. Very innocently you read, oh, Yeats prefers that land, Byzantium. He appreciates that with a wholehearted happiness. He willingly sails back to Byzantium centuries back. This person is willing to sail centuries back to 15th or 14th or 16th century to see that worth of that culture, art, everything. But when you take a post-colonialist stand, when you try to read the same poem with a post-colonial mindset, critical eye, you will see Yeats' poetry, his compositions are not really innocently giving a very beautiful picture of Byzantium, but looking at Byzantium as an exotic other. So let us see what Said, Edward Said has to talk about Yeats or about his stance. Said views the desire, actually this is given as a desire of the speaker to sail back to Byzantium, to reach that city of flourished art, culture, literature, creativity, everything. Said views the desire frequently expressed in Yeats' work to regain contact with an earlier mythical, nationalistic Ireland as typical of writers whose own position is post-colonial. The first part is going to be, you are going to try to connect with the reclaiming of land. First part is clear. Its intention is not actually criticized, but you get an idea. Like Yeats was an Irish nationalist. Ireland as a nation got conquered, was under colonial rule for a long time. And his being this Yeats, W.B. Yeats, being a very staunch nationalist, strong nationalist, national figure, he also wanted to free his country, his nation, from the colonial threat and colonial rule. But he feels that this Ireland, or whichever person it may be, you feel that our own culture, our own land is looted, or even after the colonial rule is withdrawn from a land, your essence is lost, or your land, your culture, your country, its identity was in one way or other, somewhere it has lost its luster, its worth. There is a sense of loss, a nostalgia for the past. And you see, when he talks about going back to some another land, you can identify, you can find out Yeats' wish to reclaim that particular Ireland before colonization, its impact, and its erasing the real part of Ireland with its imperialistic rule and regime. So mythical nationalistic Ireland, he is so fond of. He wanted to reclaim that past. As a typical of writers whose own position is post-colonial. So Yeats, you cannot say that he is completely an English man. He is an Irish person. This Ireland was once a colony of England. So his own position was once post-colonial. I told you America. Now you can see it's one of the imperial nations. But there was a time when America also was under the colonial regime of different other colonizers. So every American is a post-colonial in that sense. But when you talk about them, always we have the tendency to look at every American to be imperialistic with a set of colonial agendas. So this is the way centuries get you, or different time periods get you different identities. Like once you are a post-colonial, then you are a colonizer. In the case of America, post-colonial and colonizing, they are colonized and colonized. As far as India is concerned, we didn't colonize any other land. So you remain as the colonized or post-colonial. After colonizing, after their withdrawal, you are colonized or post-colonial. Now you are not colonized in the present sense of the term. We were colonized. We are not colonized. We are post-colonial because of the withdrawal of the colonizers or their colonial regime from the land. Same with Africa. They also do not have a history of colonizing of another land. But certain lands are there who were once colonies of some another imperial powers, colonial powers. In the same way, Yeats, when you look at Yeats, W. Yeats, his own Ireland was once part of British colonization. So his own position is post-colonial, and this is closely related to Fanon's idea of the need to reclaim the past. So he feels like after these colonizers coming and settling in my land, its luster, its worth somewhere has faded in one sense or the other, in one way or the other. So definitely I would like to reclaim my past. And when he talks about the lost, and when he chooses this Byzantium itself as the land of his desire, that Byzantium also is known for its worth, its flourishing, its height during a time. It was at the peak of, it's a center of learning, culture, everything during a time before the fall. So again there you can identify with a comparison you can make. Desire for a land which was once with all the prosperity, but after the fall or after the colonizing effect, imperializing effect, it lost its features. And in the same way, it feels that his own Ireland, his own nation is somewhere affected in a negative way after the colonizers' interruption. So here Frantz Fanon already has given as part of post-colonial theory about the need to reclaim the past. So here Fanon's idea of reclaiming the past means they erase or distort our history. They write down our history as if it's so authentic, as if before their coming there was no history at all for the land. We were so totally anonymous a mass. This is the way we got represented, or we got portrayed in most of their historical records and many other literary writings. So this is our turn now to reclaim such a past, or that past which is there and which is duly erased for their sake of convenience. Right. So characteristically, post-colonial writers evoke or create a pre-colonial version of their own nation. Characteristically, post-colonial writers evoke or create a pre-colonial version of their own nation. Means you are trying to reclaim your past through your writings. It's a version of your own, but with giving it more worth and better representation. It's unlike as they portray us in their own writings. Like barbarous, they attribute very negative qualities to us, whether it is in movies, whether it is in literary writings, or any other type of art. Rejecting the modern and the contemporary, which is tainted with the colonial status of their countries. Actually, colonial status of your country. Tainted with the colonial status. Because, after colonization, your country is not actually the real land which was there before their arrival. Definitely a lot of changes are likely to occur. Here then is the first characteristic of post-colonialism, an awareness of the representations of the non-European as exotic or immoral other. So this is always everywhere, this is their idea about representing us as an exotic and immoral other. Means you are good for nothing. You were really cultureless before our arrival. After our coming, that you began to be educated. You began to get the sense of culture, morality, codes, standard, everything. They say that we gave you all of this. It was because of us you got everything like this or that. So, for Yeats, now let us come back to Yeats. As often with the post-colonial writer, an uneasy attitude to the colonial language is evident. For Yeats, as often with the post-colonial writer, an uneasy attitude to the colonial language. I told you, any Irishman who is a strong nationalist can never be fine and comfortable with the Britishers because of the colonizing impact, colonizing experience, the worst colonizing experience they had to suffer at a time period in the history of Ireland. So, in Yeats also you can see such an attitude to the colonial language. Like we are uncomfortable with English actually. Why don't we speak English? We have fascination for this language, not just because of its global reach and global, not just English as a global language with the maximum and wide reach, but because of the colonizing impact and the uncontrollable passion and obsession you hold for that language, their ways, their lifestyle, their features, everything. So his injunction to Irish poets that they should learn their craft implies the need to serve a humble apprenticeship. Language is a very great and prominent tool in post-colonial criticism, post-colonial stand. We will have a discussion on that in the coming session, coming paragraphs. But here you see definitely is not fond of English people because of the negative impact of the colonization of his own favorite nation, his own motherland, his own land. But here, he writes many of his poems. Many of his poems are available in English. So using their language to criticize them is one of the possible stances, possible ways in post-colonial literature, post-colonial criticism. So here this humble attitude to language, it's not a humble attitude, it's in quotes, may remind us of Stephen Dedalus' thoughts about the English language in James Joyce, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. Very important modern novel by James Joyce, where you come across it. I am not going to get you the plot, you have to go and read it out your own, the plot at least. Please read these two poems, Byzantium, Sailing to Byzantium and Byzantium if possible, today itself. And try to know what it is, what is given inside it. Here we refer to, or we have the reference for James Joyce, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. Actually a Bildungsroman novel, talks about the development of the hero who is born into a very orthodox family, but later he achieves a kind of artistic freedom by the end of the novel. That's not our matter of concern here. In the context of post-colonialism, we are going to take a few words by the hero and how this language element can be analyzed in terms of post-colonial attitude. Especially in the early scene in which Stephen is the hero, titular hero, is patronized by an English priest because of his use of a local dialect word. Here, we always talk about the Kannur dialect. Some people are not really confident about it, so that when you feel like in a gathering I should furnish my language, they try to do like that. But if you feel like sticking to your identity, you feel, it's by dialect. It's a variety of the language, my mother tongue, so there is no need to color it. Sometimes we come across certain terms which are not with the same meaning. In Malayalam itself, we have difference in Malayalam with the Kannur Malayalam. Certain terms refer something and something entirely different in Trivandrum Malayalam or in Malayalam variety from Thrissur or some other areas. Those differences are there, and obviously sometimes we have to give explanation. That is something different. But here you see a person is somewhere meeting with an uncomfortable situation where his own dialect, use of a dialect word of his own language, local dialect word, causes trouble. You are given a reference or you are given a suggestion like not this or that. In Malayalam I will get you an example. Like Chaduga. Chaduga in the sense, we always use it in the sense of, throw it away. Something you hold at hand and you are instructed to throw it away. In Malayalam, chadu, adu chadu ennaanu parayum. But for most of the people from, I think from north or south I think, they never understand, they always stay stuck with wonder. Chaduga, for them it's jumping. Ila chaduga. Is this person talking about jumping with a leaf or what is that? They don't understand. So that is a difference in the meaning. It doesn't make your own dialect invalid. but you should be confident about it. Otherwise, when other people mock at you, laugh at you for some of your usages, some of your words, dialectic use, you're likely to be going to this colonized or post-colonial dilemma of not really confident about your own culture, your own ways, your own lifestyle. So here Stephen tells himself, the language in which we are speaking is his before it's mine. That's the only thing we have to take from this novel actually for the time being. It's very important. The language in which we are speaking is his before it's mine. Is his before it is mine. Because that language I use, but I don't feel it is mine. It is someone else. I'm using it, but not always having the confidence. I don't have the confidence while using this or that. Certain words when I use, I have made, so I have pronounced it in a different way, pronounced it in a wrong way. Or I constructed this sentence like this or that. It should have been like this. So you are always in a threat of committing mistake. You are never in a comfortable position because you feel this language to be alien. It's not yours, your own. Even you might have come across people who try to furnish their Malayalam according to the situation, according to the gathering, so that we feel like, they are taking all the effort to sound very elegant, but it is very awkward to listen to. We understand that they are taking effort to speak like that. We say like eat, ida, ada. Instead, just for the sake of bringing a kind of elegance, if you are trying to speak like with all the effort every day, you can understand, you can sense that furnishing. It's not truly yours. You're taking it from someone else for the sake of something, some purpose. Purposefully you're taking that. And it's not going to bring you true to heart using, or it's not comforting you. It's not actually comforting you in any sense. That's problematic. So here, with Stephen's own term, you can understand the same concern. It's not mine, it's his before it's mine. I use it, I use it, but I don't feel like I feel that it's mine, my own. Then what is there? More recently, the Irish poet Seamus Heaney, in a poem entitled The Ministry of Fear, in another poem by Seamus Heaney, recalls his childhood unease and self-consciousness about his pronunciation of English. You can definitely identify with him. Why don't we speak English even when it's the official? See, when you join for a graduate course, you are supposed to use English in the class. Medium of instruction is supposed to be English. But when we stick to that, you always raise your concern that we are not actually as we should. We need explanation in our mother tongue. It's fine that you are fond of your mother tongue, fond of our mother tongue. That's good. But certain spaces are there which demand you the medium of instruction to be one particular language. But you are unease. When we compel you to speak out in the class, English only should be spoken in the class, tomorrow onwards. You people who make all the cacophonous voice in the class, noise in the class, may fall silent because you feel it unease You want to ask a question, you want to write an apology letter or some other letters of request, whatever it may be. You approach some of your friend at least to get confirmation that, oh, this is fine, this is not wrong. Yesterday I got a letter, very old letter, I didn't check out the name or anything, but sorry for attended the class. That was the way it was written like. And I see, it's not good that we mock, but at least when you write an apology letter, it might have been a letter of apology for not attending the class, but it is written like sorry for attended the class. It's completely wrong, utterly wrong. There is no sign of receiving or anything from the teacher, but it is clipped in the department and it's there, kept with the other letters to some class advisors, I don't know. Anyway. So here, another person talks about the fear, the self-consciousness about his pronunciation of English. So this linguistic difference amounts to a sense that the linguistic furniture belongs to somebody else, and therefore shouldn't be moved around without permission. So this is not yours, you can use it, but it is someone else. It's that of somebody else. So you shouldn't move around without permission. Every time you should watch over your own self and others to make sure that you do not commit errors, you don't make errors. So every time you are self-conscious. Some post-colonial writers have concluded that the colonizer's language is permanently tainted and that to write in it involves a crucial acquiescence in colonial structures. So everywhere you use the colonizer's language, you can find out the elements of their prejudice, racial, national, many other prejudices which is tainted, which is already built in with the prejudices and judgments of on their own part. It's permanently tainted. When you use that, you also are disseminating, you are also promoting such an ideology. But we cannot completely stay away from using that. Language itself is a second area of concern in post-colonial criticism. It's highlighted with that much importance because language itself is a second area of concern in post-colonial criticism. So here you can see another references. If you want, you can read those out as well. And again, next part we will discuss in the next session. Thank you so much for joining. Okay.